The slap echoed louder than the wedding band. My daughter-in-law's palm cracked across my face before 200 guests, champagne flutes frozen mid-toast. She smiled like she'd swatted a fly. But when the best man grabbed the microphone and said 7 words, every guest in that ballroom turned to stare at me. And the woman who had just struck me went pale, as the tablecloth beneath her trembling hands. Keep watching. Because what followed after that wedding reception, the secrets unearthed, the betrayals exposed, and the justice delivered, will make you rethink everything you know about family, power, and the quiet strength of a man the world forgot. Sometimes revenge is not loud. Sometimes it is built slowly, brick by brick, like the buildings I once designed. My name is Walter Bennett. I am 63 years old. And for most of my life, I was an architect. Not the kind who sits behind a screen dragging lines across a monitor, but the kind who could feel a building's soul through the grain of its blueprint. I built Bennett and Stone architecture from a single drafting table in my garage into a firm that reshaped the face of Savannah, Georgia. People used to call me the man who turned empty land into art. But that was another lifetime, before I learned how quickly respect disappears when you stop standing in the buildings your name is carved into. These days, I live in the back room of my own house, the one I designed 26 years ago for my son Nathan and his wife Victoria. Officially, I am retired. Unofficially, I am the man who takes out the recycling on Wednesday mornings and keeps his mouth shut at the dinner table. That night at the Marshall House, one of the oldest hotels in Savannah's historic district, I was something worse than invisible. I was a prop. Victoria had organized the evening as a vow renewal ceremony, celebrating her and Nathan's 10th anniversary. But it was not a celebration of love. It was a production staged to display her taste, her connections, and her dominance. The Marshall House gleamed under crystal chandeliers that scattered candlelight across marble floors. White roses climbed iron trellises near the entrance, and a string quartet played softly by the bar. 200 guests filled the ballroom, most of them Victoria's people, the kind who measured friendship by followers and judged character by the label on your handbag. I was directed to the last table beside the service corridor, close enough to smell garlic and roasted butter drifting through the kitchen doors. Victoria crossed the room and leaned close. "You look fine there, Dad," she said, her voice sweet as caramel. "Out of the spotlight. You prefer it that way, right?" She did not wait for an answer. Between courses, Victoria's cheeks flushed from whiskey. Her gestures grew wider, her voice louder. She caught my eye and raised her glass. "Walter," she called, loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. "Come pour me another drink. The waiter is busy." The room quieted. I stayed seated. "I think you have had enough for tonight, Victoria," I said calmly. "It has been a long evening." No one breathed. The string quartet faltered. Victoria blinked, her smile sharpening into a blade. "Excuse me? Did you just tell me what to do? I suggested you switch to water." "That is all." Nathan stared at his napkin, tracing its folds like a man trying to vanish into fabric. Victoria rose slowly, steadied herself on the table, and crossed the distance between us with deliberate steps, each heel strike a punctuation mark on the marble. She stopped directly in front of me. Every eye in the room followed. "You forget your place, old man," she whispered. But in a room that's silent, even a whisper is a shout. Her hand came up fast. The slap cracked across my left cheek, the sound cutting through the ballroom like a gunshot. My head turned with the force. I tasted copper. The sting spread like heat from a furnace. Gasps rippled across the room. Chairs scraped. Silverware clattered. The string quartet stopped entirely, the last note hanging in the air like a question that would never find its answer. Victoria stood breathing hard, the gold embroidery on her gown catching candlelight, like something precious hiding something rotten. Her hand trembled at her side. "That is what happens," she said, voice shaking but defiant, "when people forget where they belong." I looked at Nathan. He opened his mouth, then closed it. His hand lay flat on the table, motionless. He was not just afraid of her. He was afraid of what would shatter inside himself if he dared to stand. A waiter rushed forward, stammering apologies that were not his to make. I waved him off. My cheek throbbed, but my hands were steady. I pressed the napkin to my face and stood. The room held its breath. "Mistakes happen," I said quietly. My voice did not shake, but I was not talking about the slap, because what Victoria did not know, what none of them knew, was that this building, this beautiful ballroom with its crown molding and arched windows and hand-laid herringbone floors, had been designed by one man. Me. And the best man standing near the bar, the one she assumed was just another of Nathan's college friends, had just recognized the architect behind the walls she was standing in. I reached for my coat and walked toward the exit, past the frozen faces, past the whispered judgments, past 200 people who had watched a woman strike an old man and done nothing. The candles flickered in my wake. Outside, the Savannah night wrapped around me heavy with magnolia and moss-draped oak. I inhaled deeply, tasting freedom laced with humiliation. My reflection caught in the hotel's glass doors, a gray-haired man with a red mark on his cheek walking away from a world that had forgotten his name. I had barely reached the sidewalk when the doors swung open behind me. Footsteps, quick and purposeful, echoed across the stone steps. "Sir," a voice called out, breathless but steady. "Mr. Bennett, please wait." The voice behind me did not carry pity. It carried something I had not heard in years, something closer to reverence than sympathy. I turned. A young man stood on the hotel steps, mid-30s, sharp suit, dark hair combed back. He was breathing hard, his tie loosened as though he had pushed through the crowd in a hurry. I recognized him vaguely from the reception. He had been seated near the bar, one of Nathan's groomsmen. The best man, if I remembered correctly. "I am sorry to chase you down like this," he said, stepping closer. His voice was steady despite the breathlessness. "But I need to ask you something." I waited, the night air settling against the sting on my cheek. Savannah hummed around us, cicadas singing in the oaks, the distant clatter of a horse-drawn carriage on cobblestone. He extended his hand. "My name is Daniel Royce. I am an architect with Whitmore and Falk in New York." I shook it, more out of habit than interest. His grip was firm, earnest. "Sir," he said, studying my face the way someone studies a painting they have seen only in books. "You are Walter Bennett, aren't you?" The Walter Bennett. The name landed differently when someone else said it. In this house, I was just Walter, the man in the back room. Out here, under the moss-draped oaks with the hotel glowing behind us, the name sounded like it belonged to someone I used to know. "That was a long time ago," I said. Daniel shook his head slowly. "No, sir. Your work is in every textbook I studied at Columbia. The Hargrove Center downtown, the Whitfield Library restoration, the Riverfront Pavilion at Forsyth Park." He paused, his eyes brightening with the kind of excitement only people who love their craft carry. "You redesigned the entire southern wing of this hotel. I wrote my thesis on your use of load-bearing arches in historical restoration." I felt heat rise in my chest. Not embarrassment, but something older, deeper. Nostalgia braided with loss. It had been years since anyone spoke my name, as though it meant something beyond an inconvenience. "That is kind of you to remember," I said quietly. "Remember?" He almost laughed. "Sir, half the architects in the Southeast owe their understanding of adaptive reuse to your firm. Bennett and Stone did not just build structures. You taught an entire generation how to honor what came before while building something new." The words hung in the humid air between us. I did not know what to say. The man in that thesis, the one who redesigned southern wings and shook hands with governors, felt as distant as a photograph left too long in the sun. Daniel glanced back toward the hotel doors. The muffled sound of conversation leaked through the glass. The reception slowly recovering from the scene Victoria had caused. "Does she know?" he asked, lowering his voice. "Your daughter-in-law. Does she know who you are?" I met his gaze. She knows exactly who I am, I said. She just does not think it matters. Something shifted in his expression. The admiration hardened into quiet resolve. He straightened his jacket and took a step toward the doors. "Wait here," he said. "Please." I should have stopped him. I should have told him that recognition was not what I came for, that the evening was already ruined enough. But something in his certainty held me still. Maybe it was the way he said please. Not as a request, but as a promise. Through the glass, I watched him weave through the crowd. People parted for him instinctively, the way they do for someone moving with intention. He reached the front of the ballroom where the string quartet had resumed a tentative melody, and he spoke briefly with the event coordinator. A moment later, the music stopped again. Daniel stepped onto the small stage where Victoria had delivered her anniversary toast an hour earlier. He picked up the microphone, and the feedback squeal silenced the remaining chatter. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of a man who knows exactly what he is about to do. "I apologize for the interruption. My name is Daniel Royce. I am the best man tonight, and I have not yet given my toast." A few polite laughs scattered across the room. Victoria settled back into her chair, adjusting her gown, smiling, as though the evening's earlier ugliness had already been forgotten. Daniel paused, letting the silence build. Then he turned toward the ballroom's arched ceiling, its crown molding, the hand-laid herringbone floor beneath their feet. "Before I raise my glass," he continued, "I want to ask everyone here a question." He swept his hand across the room. "Do you know who designed this building?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A few guests glanced at each other. Victoria tilted her head, curious but unconcerned. "This ballroom," Daniel said, "with its restored arches, its original brickwork, its perfect marriage of history and modern elegance, was designed by one of the most respected architects in the American South." He looked directly at the glass doors where I stood outside, my reflection barely visible against the warm light spilling from within. "Do you know who that man really is?" 7 words. That was all it took. 7 words. And the room shifted like a building settling into new ground. Daniel pointed toward me. "The man your host struck tonight, the man she seated by the kitchen door, is Walter Bennett, founder of Bennett and Stone Architecture, the man who designed the very walls you are standing inside." The silence that followed was not like the silence after the slap. That silence had been sharp, full of shock and second-hand shame. This silence was something else entirely. It was the sound of 200 people recalculating everything they thought they knew. Heads turned. Eyes found me through the glass. I stood on the sidewalk, my coat over my arm, the red mark still warm on my cheek. Victoria's smile collapsed. Not slowly, not gracefully, but all at once, like a facade crumbling when the foundation gives way. She looked at me through the glass doors, and for the first time since I had known her, I saw something unfamiliar in her expression. Fear, not of me, but of what the room now saw when they looked at her. The woman who had struck the man who built the house she was standing in. Nathan lifted his head from the table. His eyes met mine across the ballroom, through the glass, across all the years of silence between us. I could not read what I saw there. Shame, maybe, or the first flicker of something he had buried so deep he had forgotten it existed. I did not go back inside. There was nothing left for me in that room. The truth had already walked in without me. I turned away from the light, the applause beginning faintly behind the glass, and stepped into the savanna darkness. The oak branches above me swayed, like old hands reaching for something they could not quite hold. That night, something shifted inside me. Not anger, not revenge, something quieter. The feeling you get when you have been asleep for a very long time, and someone finally calls your name. Recognition. And with it, a question I had not allowed myself to ask in years. If the world still remembered Walter Bennett, then who had I been pretending to be all this time? Before the slap, before the champagne, Before any of it, there was a man who once built skylines with his bare hands, and then, quietly, let the world forget him. Most mornings start the same. I wake before the sun reaches my window, brew a single cup of the cheap instant coffee Victoria buys in bulk, and sit at the small table near the kitchen window, where the light cuts through the blinds in thin, pale stripes. From that spot I can see the garden I used to tend. Eleanor and I planted it together the spring we moved in. Rows of hydrangeas along the fence. Jasmine, climbing the trellis near the back gate. A magnolia sapling she insisted would one day shade the entire yard. She was right. It did. But 2 years ago, Victoria had it all ripped out and replaced with decorative gravel and stone pavers. Real plants attract bugs, she said. And bugs attract complaints. I did not argue. By then I had already learned that silence was the price of staying. The house itself is a quiet monument to a version of me that no longer exists. I designed it 26 years ago as a wedding gift for Nathan. Every angle measured with love. Every room shaped around the idea that a home should hold the people inside it gently. The arched doorways were Eleanor's idea. The bay window in the living room was mine. Now the arched doorways frame Victoria's collection of abstract art that cost more than the original construction, and the bay window is blocked by a decorative shelf she ordered from a catalog. My room is at the back of the house, past the laundry and beside the water heater. It is small, barely large enough for a single bed, a nightstand, and a narrow desk. Victoria calls it the guest suite. There are no guests who would want it. Most days I hear her before I see her. The click of her heels on the tile floor is the house's unofficial alarm clock. She moves through rooms the way weather moves through open land. Fast, commanding, impossible to ignore. "Walter," she will say. Her voice clipped and efficient, standing in the kitchen doorway without entering. "Did you pick up the dry cleaning?" Or, "Walter, the recycling was not sorted properly." Or simply, "Walter," followed by a sigh that says everything her words do not. I nod. I always nod. There is no point explaining that I once managed a staff of 60, or that my signature sits on the blueprints of buildings she drives past every day, without knowing. She does not want to hear about what was. She is too busy controlling what is. Nathan means well. My boy has always been gentle. A quiet soul in a loud world. He works long hours at a civil engineering firm downtown, leaving before dawn and returning after dinner, his shoulders sagging beneath a tie that always seems a little too tight. When he is home, he avoids confrontation the way some men avoid mirrors. If Victoria sighs about an unwashed dish or a misplaced remote, Nathan lowers his eyes and says, "I will talk to Dad." Talk, in this house, usually means apologize for things I did not do or failed to anticipate she wanted. Each time, the anger dulls into something quieter, heavier. You begin to choose peace even when it feels like surrender. The only room that still belongs to me is the small study off the hallway. Victoria never enters it. She says it smells like old paper and nostalgia, as though those were diseases. The walls are lined with framed newspaper clippings from Bennett and Stone's early years. Local architect reshapes Savannah's skyline. Walter Bennett, the man who builds dreams into walls. The ink has faded on some of them, the paper yellowed at the edges, but the headlines still hold their shape. There is one photograph I keep on the desk. Black and white, slightly overexposed. It shows me standing in front of our first completed project, a small community library on the east side of Savannah. I am wearing my old drafting coat, sleeves rolled up, grinning like a man who still believes hard work guarantees respect. Eleanor took that picture. I remember because she laughed when the wind blew my hair sideways and I refused to pose again. Victoria has told me twice to take it down. "Old things attract dust and sentimentality," she said once, half joking, half serious. The past does not match the aesthetic, so I keep it tucked between the lamp and a stack of unopened mail, where the afternoon light catches it just right. That photograph is the only place I still recognize myself. One afternoon, as I was wiping the frame with my sleeve, I heard a knock at the front door. It was Mrs. Patterson from next door, an elderly woman with silver hair pinned neatly and more curiosity than discretion. She carried a plate of pecan cookies and the kind of smile that says she came for conversation, not delivery. "I heard Victoria's charity auction was a success," she said as I let her in. "You must be proud." "Of course," I said, "because pride is cheaper than truth." She settled into the living room chair, talking about the neighborhood association and the new speed bumps on Whitaker Street. But her eyes wandered, the way curious eyes always do, until they landed on the study door I had left open. She stood and walked toward it before I could redirect her. Inside, she stopped in front of the framed clippings, her mouth forming a small circle of surprise. "Goodness," she breathed, stepping closer to the photograph on the desk. "You are that Walter Bennett, aren't you? The architect." She picked up the frame carefully. "I remember this library. My granddaughter had her first reading group there. You built that?" I felt warmth spread across my chest, not pride exactly, but something close to being remembered. "That was a long time ago, Mrs. Patterson." "Still," she said, squinting at the photograph the way people do when they are trying to match a memory to a face. "You look the same, maybe a little grayer." She smiled. "Savannah remembers, even if people forget to say so." I wanted to tell her that the man in that photograph would never have let someone rearrange his life into a back bedroom. But I did not. I thanked her for the cookies and walked her to the door. After she left, I sat in the study for a long time, staring at my younger self behind the glass. The house was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of Victoria's voice outside, sharp and commanding, speaking into her phone. I was about to close the study door when her words drifted through the open window, clear enough to freeze me mid-step. "The Bennett and Stone anniversary is coming up. I need to make sure everything is positioned correctly before the board meeting." My hand stopped on the doorframe. "Bennett and Stone. My company. My name." Spoken like a tool she was sharpening for her own use. I stood there in the doorway of my small study, the photograph of my younger self watching from the desk, and felt something I had not felt in years. Not anger, not sadness, curiosity, the dangerous kind. Bennett and Stone. The name pulled me backward through time like a current I had stopped fighting years ago. I stood in the doorway of my study, Victoria's voice still carrying through the window, and the past opened beneath me like a trapdoor. Not the polished version people read about in newspapers. The real one. The version that smelled like sawdust and cheap takeout at 2 in the morning, where every wall I built started with doubt and ended with something close to prayer. I started Bennett and Stone in 1989, in the garage of a rented duplex on the east side of Savannah. The drafting table was second-hand, bought from a retiring surveyor who charged me $40 and wished me luck with the kind of pity reserved for dreamers. Eleanor and I had been married 3 years by then. She worked mornings at the public library and spent evenings beside me in that garage, organizing receipts, answering calls, brewing coffee so strong it could hold a pencil upright. She was the one who chose the name. "Bennett and Stone," she said one night, tapping her pen against the edge of the table. "Bennett for the family. Stone for what lasts." I told her it sounded too serious for a 2-person firm operating out of a garage. She smiled. "Then grow into it." So I did. The first commission was a small residential remodel, a kitchen expansion for a retired teacher on Abercorn Street. I made $72 and spent $60 of it on new drafting supplies. The second was a porch restoration for a historic home near Chippewa Square. Word traveled. In Savannah, reputation moves through neighborhoods like weather. One good project leads to a phone call, which leads to a handshake, which leads to a name people start to trust. Within 5 years, Bennett and Stone had an office on Broughton Street and a staff of 12. Within 10, We were designing commercial buildings, civic projects, and restoration work across the Southeast. The firm became known for something rare in modern architecture: respect for what already existed. We did not demolish to build. We listened to old structures the way doctors listen to heartbeats, finding what was still strong and building around it. Eleanor called it honest architecture. "You do not erase a building's history," she would say. "You let it breathe." The biggest project came in 2003. The city commissioned us to redesign the Southern Pavilion at Forsyth Park, Savannah's crown jewel. It was the most visible project in the firm's history. I spent 18 months on the design, walking the park at dawn, sketching the fountain from every angle, studying how the light moved through the live oaks at different hours. When it was finished, the Savannah Morning News ran a full-page feature with a photograph of me standing beneath the new colonnade. Walter Bennett, the man who builds dreams into walls. Eleanor cut that article out and framed it herself. She hung it in the hallway of our home, the one I had designed for Nathan as a wedding gift. "So the walls remember who built them," she said. "Those were the years when my name meant something. Invitations to galas, consultations with the city council, a guest lecture at the Savannah College of Art and Design. I shook hands with the governor at a ribbon cutting. I was profiled in Southern Living. Strangers recognized me at the grocery store. But none of it mattered as much as the evenings I spent with Eleanor in the garden, her hands in the soil, my sketches spread across the patio table, the magnolia sapling growing slowly in the corner of the yard. She kept me honest. When success began to feel like armor, she reminded me it was just cloth. "Be careful, Walter," she told me once, sitting on the back porch with her tea, watching the sunset pour through the oak branches. "The higher you build, the harder it is to see the ground. And the ground is where the people are." I listened. Or I thought I did. The diagnosis came in 2014. Pancreatic cancer, stage 3. The doctors gave her 8 months. She lasted 11, because Eleanor never did anything on anyone else's schedule. Those final months were the quietest of my life. I closed the office early every day and sat beside her bed, reading aloud from the novels she loved, adjusting her pillows, pretending that silence between sentences was comfortable and not the sound of the world ending one breath at a time. On her last good day, she asked me to sit close. Her voice was thin, but her eyes were steady. "Promise me something," she said. "Anything. When I am gone, do not let the buildings become who you are. You are more than what you have built. Humility is the foundation worth laying. Do not let pride close the doors you designed for others to walk through." I promised. I held her hand until the light left her eyes and the room grew still. After the funeral, I kept that promise the only way I knew how. I stepped back from everything. I transferred operational control of Bennett and Stone to Nathan, signed over management authority, and retreated into the back room of the house I had built with my own hands. I stopped attending board meetings. I stopped visiting project sites. I stopped answering the phone when old colleagues called. I told myself I was honoring Eleanor. That silence was dignity. That disappearing was the same as being humble. But sitting in my study now, the photograph of my younger self watching from the desk, Victoria's voice still sharp through the window, I realized the truth I had been avoiding for years. Humility had not kept me safe. It had made me invisible. And in that invisibility, someone else had walked into the space I left behind and filled it with something Eleanor would have never recognized. I looked at the drafting code in the photograph, the rolled sleeves, the confident grin. That man would not have sat quietly while his name was borrowed without permission. That man would not have slept in a back room of his own house. I did not know yet what Victoria was doing with Bennett and Stone. But the curiosity that had sparked when I heard her on the phone was no longer just curiosity. It was something with edges, something that felt, for the first time in years, like purpose. Outside, the Savannah sun was setting behind the oaks, painting the sky in stripes of amber and rust. I closed the study door and walked to my room. In the bottom drawer of my nightstand, Beneath a stack of Eleanor's letters, I found what I was looking for. My old access card to Bennett and Stone's corporate office. The plastic was scratched. The photo faded, but the magnetic strip still caught the light. I turned it over in my hands. The last time I had used it was the day I walked away from everything. I slipped it into my pocket and sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the house settle around me. Tomorrow, I would find out what Victoria had been building in my absence, and whether the foundation she stood on was as solid as she believed. The next morning, the house was still dark when I left. Victoria's heels had not yet begun their daily march across the tile. Nathan's car was already gone, pulled out before dawn as always. I slipped through the front door with my coat and the old access card in my pocket, feeling like a stranger breaking into his own life. The drive to Bennett and Stone's corporate office took 12 minutes. I had not made the trip in nearly a decade, but my hands remembered every turn. The way muscle memory holds things, the mind tries to forget. The building sat on East Bay Street, a 3-story brownstone I had personally restored in 1997. Its facade still looked the same, warm brick and wrought iron balconies, though the signage had been updated to something sleeker and less personal. The lobby was quiet at that hour. A young receptionist sat behind a polished desk, her nails clicking softly against her keyboard. She looked up when I entered and froze. "Mr. Bennett," she said, standing so quickly her chair nearly rolled into the wall. "I did not know you were coming in today." "Neither did I," I said, offering a small nod. "I will be in the archive room." She did not question me. My card still worked at the elevator, and as the doors closed, I caught my reflection in the mirrored walls. Older, grayer, slower, but still a man who knew the bones of this building because he had drawn every one of them. The archive room was in the basement, a long, narrow space lined with filing cabinets and old blueprint tubes. It smelled of paper and dust, the scent of 1,000 decisions preserved in folders and forgotten. I sat at the corner workstation and powered on the terminal. The system login screen appeared, blinking patiently. I typed the password Eleanor had chosen years ago. Grace, 1962. The year she was born. The system accepted it without hesitation, as though it had been waiting. The corporate directory loaded. I began with Victoria's name, searching the internal database for any files, contracts, or correspondence tied to her. The results appeared quickly. Too quickly. The first entry was a company called Marsh Premier Properties. I had never heard of it. The registration documents listed its principal address as a suite in downtown Savannah, and its founding officer as Victoria Marsh Bennett, Senior Design Consultant, Bennett Family Holdings. I read the title twice. Senior Design Consultant, Bennett Family Holdings. Neither position existed. Neither had ever been authorized by me or the board. I clicked deeper. Contract files opened one after another, 12 in total, each a real estate development agreement between Marsh Premier Properties and various commercial developers across the Southeast, shopping centers in Jacksonville, residential complexes in Charleston, a mixed-use tower proposal in Atlanta. Every single one carried my name. My signature sat at the bottom of each document, neat and precise, the familiar curve of the W, the slight upward flourish on the B that I had developed over decades of signing architectural plans. It looked authentic. It looked like me, but I had never seen these contracts. I had never signed them. I had never heard of any of these projects. I leaned closer to the screen, my pulse steady but my jaw tight. She had studied my handwriting carefully, the pressure of the pen, the spacing between letters, even the way I connected the double T in Bennett. It was meticulous, almost flattering, if it had not been forgery. I opened the email archives next. Victoria's correspondence with the developers painted a picture so precise it could have been a blueprint of deception. She had introduced herself as my direct representative, claiming I had personally approved each venture. She attached images from Bennett and Stone's old website, used the company logo without permission, and referred to me in third person as our honorary founder and chief visionary. In one email she wrote, "Mr. Bennett has reviewed the plans and is fully supportive of this partnership. His involvement, while private, is the foundation of our family's continued commitment to excellence." I could almost hear her voice reading those words, smooth and convincing. A performance so polished it left no fingerprints. She had not stolen my name to humiliate me. She had stolen it because it still carried weight. In her world, reputation was currency, and she had been spending mine freely, writing checks against a legacy I had built with 30 years of honest work. I sat back in the chair and stared at the ceiling. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above me, their cold hum filling the silence. I thought of Eleanor, of the promise I had made by her bedside. Humility is the foundation worth laying. I had believed that. I still believed it. But I was beginning to understand something she might not have anticipated. Humility is not the same as surrender. And silence, when it allows theft, becomes complicity. I printed the 12 contracts one by one. The printer hummed in the basement, quiet, each page sliding out, like evidence being pulled from the walls of a house I no longer controlled. I stacked them neatly, aligning the edges the way I used to align blueprint pages before a client presentation. Then I opened one more folder. The file directory listed it simply as Foundation. I assumed it was a structural reference, a subfolder related to one of the development projects, but when it opened, the header on the first document stopped me cold. The Eleanor Foundation. Empowering Communities Through Design. My wife's name. In bold type. Across the top of a charity brochure I had never approved, never seen, never imagined. The photograph on the front showed Victoria smiling warmly beside a group of women in hard hats, her arm draped around them as though she had poured the concrete herself. Beneath the photo, in elegant script, was a tagline that made my hands grip the edge of the desk. Build with love. Leave with grace. Those were Eleanor's words. From a letter she had written me during her treatment. A private letter. One I kept in the bottom drawer of my nightstand, beneath her other correspondence, where no one should have ever found it. My throat tightened. The fluorescent light above me flickered once, as though the building itself flinched. Of all the things she had stolen, my name, my company, my dignity, none cut deeper than this. She had taken Eleanor. She had turned my wife's dying words into a marketing slogan for a charity I had never authorized, printed on brochures I had never seen, distributed to donors who believed they were honoring a legacy that Victoria had hollowed out from the inside. I did not move for a long time. The printer was silent. The archive room was still. The only sound was my own breathing, and the faint hum of the building I had designed settling around me like an old friend unsure whether to comfort or confront. I closed the laptop slowly, pressed my hand flat against the stack of printed contracts, and felt the raised edge of my own forged signature beneath my palm. My name. Once my greatest achievement. Now, a weapon in someone else's hand. The access card was heavier than I remembered. Not physically, it was the same thin rectangle of white plastic it had always been, with the Bennett and Stone logo embossed in navy blue and my name printed beneath it in a font Eleanor had chosen herself. But holding it again after 3 years felt like gripping a key to a room I had promised myself I would never reopen. It was a Thursday morning when I finally used it. Victoria had taken Lily to her ballet class across town. Nathan was at the satellite office in Pooler, reviewing permits for a strip mall I had no part in designing. The house was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer, another piece Victoria had tried to replace twice, and which I had quietly moved back each time. I drove the old Buick down Victory Drive, past the oaks draped in Spanish moss that made Savannah look like a painting even on its ugliest days. The Bennett and Stone office sat on the corner of Drayton and 37th. A 3-story brick building I had personally restored in 2001. I remembered every beam, every joint, every pane of glass. When I pulled into the small parking lot behind the building, my hands were trembling. The side entrance still accepted my card. The green light blinked. The lock clicked. and I stepped inside a building that smelled exactly the way it always had: old wood, fresh paper, and the faintest trace of Eleanor's lavender sachets she used to tuck into the filing cabinets. No one was on the ground floor. The receptionist's desk was empty, a half-finished cup of coffee sitting beside a stack of unopened mail. I moved quickly toward the records room at the end of the hall, a narrow, windowless space lined with fireproof filing cabinets that held every contract Bennett and Stone had ever signed. I did not know exactly what I was looking for. Mrs. Patterson's words had planted a seed, and Victoria's phone call about the anniversary had watered it. Something was wrong. I could feel it the way an architect feels a crack in a foundation before anyone else notices, not through sight, but through instinct. The cabinets were organized by year. I pulled open 2022 first, flipping through folders until I found the section labeled Transfers and Amendments. There were 6 documents inside. The first 4 were routine insurance renewals, a lease extension for the Pooler satellite. But the 5th document stopped me cold. It was a transfer of intellectual property rights. Specifically, it assigned the design patents for 14 of Bennett and Stone's most recognized residential projects, including the Forsyth Park Pavilion renovation, to an entity called Marsh Premier Properties, LLC. The transfer was dated the 14th of March 2022. The consideration listed was $1. $1 for 20 years of my life's work. I turned to the signature page. There, at the bottom, in ink that was almost but not quite the right shade of blue, was my name: Walter J. Bennett. I stared at it for a long time. I have signed my name tens of thousands of times across 5 decades of professional life. I know the way my pen moves the slight upward hook on the W, the compressed loop of the B, the way the T crosses just above the midline, because Eleanor once told me it made my signature look decisive. This signature had none of those things. The W was too wide. The B was too round. The cross of the T sat flat, like someone had traced it from a photocopy. Someone had forged my signature. My chest tightened. I pulled the 6th document from the folder and found a second transfer, this one, assigning the Bennett and Stone client database, including contact information for over 300 past clients, to the same Marsh Premier Properties. Same date. Same $1 consideration. Same forged signature. I sat down on the cold concrete floor of the records room and pressed my back against the filing cabinet. The metal was cool through my shirt. I could hear my own breathing, louder than it should have been in that small, windowless space. Marsh Premier Properties. I had never heard the name, but the word Marsh echoed somewhere in the back of my mind, caught in a web of memory I could not yet untangle. I pulled out my phone and searched the Florida Division of Corporations database. Marsh Premier Properties, LLC, had been registered in Tallahassee on the 8th of January, 2022, 2 months before the forged transfers. The registered agent was listed as V. Marsh. The principal address was a P.O. box in Jacksonville. V. Marsh. Victoria's maiden name was Marsh. The connection hit me like a load-bearing wall collapsing inward. Victoria had created a shell company using her maiden name, forged my signature on legal documents, and transferred my most valuable intellectual property designs I had spent decades creating for $1. She had stolen my legacy while I sat in a guest room drinking instant coffee and watching the garden die. I photographed every page. Both transfer documents, the signature pages, the notary stamps, which I suspected were also forged, and the filing receipts stapled to the inside of each folder. I checked for more. In the 2023 section, I found a 3rd document, a licensing agreement granting Marsh Premier Properties the exclusive right to use the Bennett and Stone name for residential consultation services in 6 southeastern states. This one bore Nathan's signature. And unlike mine, it looked genuine. Nathan had signed it. Whether he knew what he was signing, whether Victoria had buried it in a stack of routine paperwork, or whether he had read every word and agreed, I did not know. But the thought that my own son might have been complicit, even passively, made my stomach turn in a way the slap at the wedding never had. I returned the folders exactly as I had found them. I wiped down the cabinet handles with my sleeve not because I was a criminal, but because I was an architect. And architects understand that you do not disturb a structure until you have a plan for what comes next. Driving home, I passed the Forsyth Park fountain glittering in the afternoon sun. A young couple sat on the bench beside the southern pavilion. My pavilion sharing a sandwich and laughing at something on a phone screen. They had no idea who had drawn those arches, who had calculated the load on those columns, who had argued with the city council for 9 months to preserve the original brickwork. And somewhere, on a piece of paper in a filing cabinet, someone had sold all of it for $1. I parked in the driveway and sat with the engine off. The photographs were saved in a locked folder on my phone. I had evidence. But evidence without strategy is just noise. Eleanor had taught me that not with words, but with the way she lived. She never reacted. She planned. She waited. She built. I would do the same. The front door opened. Victoria stood in the doorway. Lily balanced on her hip, a paper grocery bag in her other arm. "Walter, can you bring in the rest of the bags from the car?" I looked at her, at the woman who had forged my name, stolen my designs, and built a company on the bones of my career. She smiled the same bright, efficient smile she always wore, the one that made strangers think she was the most devoted daughter-in-law in Savannah. "Of course," I said. Happy to help. 3 days passed before I found the second layer. I had been patient carrying grocery bags, nodding at Victoria's instructions, eating dinner in the kitchen while she and Nathan hosted a young couple from her networking circle in the dining room. Patience was not difficult for me. I had spent 18 months waiting for the Savannah City Council to approve the Forsyth Park Pavilion redesign. I could wait 3 days to understand the full scope of what my daughter-in-law had built on the back of my name. It was Lily who led me to it. Without meaning to, she came into my room on a Sunday afternoon, barefoot, holding a crayon drawing of a purple house with a crooked chimney. She wanted tape to hang it on my wall. While I searched the desk drawer, she sat on the edge of my bed and picked up my phone, swiping through the home screen the way children do with the confident carelessness of someone who has never known a world without glass screens. "Grandpa, what's the Eleanor Foundation?" she asked. I turned around. She was looking at a notification, a Google alert I had set up 2 nights earlier for any mention of the Bennett name connected to Marsh Premier Properties. The alert had pulled up a web page I had not yet seen. "Let me see, sweetheart." She handed me the phone and went back to her drawing. I sat down and read. The Eleanor Foundation for Architectural Preservation was registered as a 501(c)(3) nonprofit in the state of Georgia, established on June 12, 2022, 3 months after the forged transfer documents. Its stated mission was to preserve and promote the architectural heritage of the American South through education, restoration, and community engagement. The board of directors listed 3 names: Victoria Bennett, President; Nathan Bennett, Treasurer; and a name I did not recognize, Peter Langford, Secretary. The website was polished. Professional photographs of historic Savannah buildings filled the landing page, and I recognized every single one of them, because I had designed or restored at least half of them. My face appeared nowhere. My name appeared nowhere, but my work was everywhere. Presented as the Foundation's portfolio of preservation projects supported by generous donors. I scrolled further. The Foundation's annual report for 2023 was available as a downloadable PDF. I opened it and began reading with the same care I once applied to structural engineering calculations, slowly, precisely, checking every number against the ones that came before it. The Foundation had received $1.2 million in donations during its first full year of operation. The donor list included names I recognized, old clients of Bennett and Stone, families whose homes I had designed, businesses whose storefronts I had restored, Mrs. Calloway, whose Victorian parlor I had saved from demolition in 2007, the Hendricks family, whose river house I had designed as a wedding gift from the bride's father. Judge Whitmore, whose courthouse office renovation had won a regional preservation award. These people had donated because they believed they were honoring Eleanor's memory. They believed they were supporting the legacy of a woman who had spent 30 years beside me, organizing files, choosing fonts, tucking lavender sachets into cabinets, and reminding me that buildings were only as honest as the hands that built them. They had been deceived. The expenditure section told the rest of the story. Of the $1.2 million received, only $87,000 had been allocated to actual preservation work. A token grant to a community center in Thunderbolt and a small donation to the Savannah College of Art and Design's architecture department. The remaining $1.1 million was categorized under 3 headings. Administrative costs, $340,000. Consulting fees, $480,000. And strategic development, $293,000. I checked the consulting fees. Payments had been made to 2 entities, Marsh Premier Properties, LLC, and a second company I had not encountered before, Langford Creative Solutions, LLC. Peter Langford, the secretary on the foundation board, was also the recipient of nearly $500,000 in consulting payments from the foundation he oversaw. It was a closed loop. Victoria collected donations using Eleanor's name and my designs. She paid the money to her own shell company and to her associate's firm. The foundation preserved nothing except the illusion that someone cared about Eleanor Bennett's legacy. I set the phone down on the nightstand and looked at Lily's purple house, now taped crookedly to the wall beside my bed. The chimney leaned to the left, and the door was too big for the frame, but there was something honest about it. The way children draw before anyone teaches them, that walls must be straight and roofs must be symmetrical. Eleanor would have loved it. I stood up and walked to the window. The sun was low over the backyard, casting long shadows across the gravel that had replaced my garden. A mockingbird sat on the fence post where a climbing rose had once grown a Cecile Brunner that Eleanor had planted the year Nathan was born. My wife's name was being used to steal from people who loved her. My designs were being sold by a woman who had slapped me in front of 200 people and then asked me to carry her groceries. And somewhere in all of this, my son, my quiet, gentle, avoidant son, had signed at least one document that made it possible. I needed help. Not the kind of help you find in a phone book or a Google search, but the kind that comes from someone who understands both the law and the particular cruelty of being betrayed by family. I needed someone who could look at these documents and tell me not just what had been done, but what could be undone. I picked up my phone again and scrolled through old contacts, names I had not called in years, people from a life I had stepped away from when Eleanor died. Near the bottom of the list, I found the one I was looking for. Franklin Davies, attorney at law, specialist in corporate fraud and nonprofit compliance, and the man whose first office I had designed for free in 1994, when he was a 26-year-old lawyer with no clients and a leaking roof. I pressed the call button. It rang 3 times. "Walter Bennett," Franklin said, his voice carrying the same warm gravel it had 30 years ago. "I was wondering when you'd finally call." "Franklin," I said, "I need to show you something, and I need you to promise me you won't do anything until I say so." There was a pause, then, "That bad?" I looked at Lily's purple house on the wall, at the crooked chimney, and the oversized door. "Worse," I said. "They used Eleanor's name." The line went quiet for a long time. Franklin had known Eleanor. He had come to her funeral. He had stood in the back row and wept without making a sound the way men of his generation believed they were supposed to grieve. "I'll clear my calendar," he said. "Come tomorrow. Bring everything." I hung up and erased the call log. Then I went downstairs, where Victoria was arranging flowers in a vase on the kitchen counter. White lilies, Eleanor's favorite, purchased with money that may very well have come from the foundation that bore her name. "Walter, can you take the trash out?" "Of course," I said, and I smiled not because anything was funny, but because for the first time in 3 years, I knew exactly what I was going to do. Franklin's office smelled like old leather and fresh coffee, the same 2 cents it had carried since 1994, when I had knocked out a wall between 2 cramped rooms and built him a proper workspace with floor-with-ceiling bookshelves and a window facing Bull Street. He had paid me with a handshake and a bottle of bourbon. 30 years later, the bourbon was long gone, but the bookshelves still held. He spent 4 hours reviewing the documents. I sat across from him and watched his face shift through a geography of expressions I had not seen on another human being in years. Disbelief, then anger, then the careful blankness of a man who has practiced controlling his reactions in front of juries for 3 decades. When he finished, he removed his reading glasses and set them on the desk. "Walter," he said, "this is not petty theft. This is wire fraud, forgery, non-profit misappropriation, and potentially money laundering. If we take this to the DA tomorrow, Victoria goes to prison." "I know. Then why are you asking me to wait?" I leaned forward. "Because if I take this to the DA, she hires a lawyer, cuts a deal, serves 18 months, and comes out with a story about how her father-in-law destroyed her life. Nathan loses his wife. Lily loses her mother. And nothing changes. The people she stole from never learn the truth. Eleanor's name stays attached to a fraud." Franklin studied me. "So what do you want?" "I want her to stand in front of every person she deceived and have nowhere to hide. And I want it done in a way that gives her one chance to choose accountability over self-destruction." "You're talking about a public exposure." "I'm talking about the Bennett and Stone 30th anniversary gala." The gala had been Victoria's idea funneled through Nathan's mouth, which was how most of her ideas entered the world. Bennett and Stone was turning 30 in October, and Victoria had proposed a grand celebration at the Savannah Civic Center. 300 guests, a retrospective of the firm's greatest projects, live music, and a keynote speech about the future of Southern architecture. She had appointed herself Master of Ceremonies. She had commissioned a 10-minute video montage of Bennett and Stone's most iconic buildings, all without asking my permission, which, thanks to the forged documents, she believed she no longer needed. The gala was 8 weeks away. 8 weeks, Franklin repeated. "That's tight, but workable. What do you have in mind?" I told him. It took an hour. When I finished, he stared at me the way he used to stare at my blueprints, with the expression of a man who could see the structure, but needed a moment to appreciate the engineering. "You want to let her build the stage," he said slowly, "and then stand on it when the lights come on. Eleanor used to say the best buildings reveal their purpose the moment you walk through the door. I want Victoria to walk through a door she built herself and find every lie she's ever told waiting on the other side." We spent 3 weeks building the case. The way I used to build houses: foundation first, frame second, finish last. Franklin subpoenaed bank records through a sealed court order. The records confirmed what the foundation's annual report had suggested. Donations collected under Eleanor's name were being laundered through consulting fees paid to Victoria's own companies. But the records revealed something unexpected. Peter Langford had been sending monthly payments of $5,000 to Pine Ridge Assisted Living in Albany, Georgia. The resident receiving the payments was Robert Marsh. Victoria's maiden name was Marsh. I filed the information away. Not yet. There were larger walls to raise before I could examine that particular crack in the foundation. Franklin divided preparation into 3 phases. Phase 1. Secure all financial evidence and chain of custody. Phase 2. Prepare a presentation that 300 people could understand without legal expertise. Phase 3. Coordinate with Chatham County DA Margaret Wu to have investigators present at the gala. Margaret Wu agreed, with one condition: Walter Bennett must not confront Victoria directly. The exposure must come through documents, not accusation. The law required evidence, not theater. I respected that. I was not interested in theater. I was interested in architecture, in building a structure so sound it could not be denied. Meanwhile, I played my role at home. I carried grocery bags. I took out the trash. I nodded when Victoria told me to stay in my room during her planning meetings. I watched her rehearse her gala speech in the living room mirror, adjusting her smile the way a contractor adjusts a facade, all surface, no structure. 6 days before the gala, she came to my room with a garment bag. "Walter, I need you to wear this at the event. Navy suit, white shirt, no tie. You'll be seated at table 12 near the back." I took the garment bag. "Thank you, Victoria." She paused in the doorway. Something flickered across her face, not guilt, but a wariness. The way an animal pauses at the edge of a clearing it has crossed 100 times, sensing for the first time that something in the tree line has changed. "You've been very quiet lately," she said. "I've always been quiet." She studied me 2 seconds longer than necessary, then turned and walked down the hall. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor I had installed 26 years ago, each step carrying her closer to a room she had built herself. I hung the suit in my closet and sat on the bed. Through the wall, Lily was singing a song about sunshine and counting to 10. 6 days. Everything was in place. Franklin had the presentation on a secured laptop. D.A. Wu's team had their assignments. Daniel Royce had agreed to attend as my guest at table 12. I picked up Eleanor's photograph from the nightstand. She was 32, standing in front of our first office on Broughton Street, holding a set of keys and laughing at something I had said that I could no longer remember. "Almost there," I whispered. The photograph did not answer. But the silence felt, for the first time in 3 years, like agreement. The Savannah Civic Center had never looked like this before. Victoria had transformed the main ballroom into something between a museum exhibition and a cathedral of ambition. 20-foot banners hung from the ceiling, each one displaying a black-and-white photograph of a Bennett and Stone project, the Forsyth Park Pavilion, the Tybee Island Lighthouse restoration, the riverfront condominiums that had been featured in Southern Living magazine in 2011. Beneath the photographs, spotlights cast warm amber circles on white linen tables set with crystal stemware and arrangements of magnolias and Spanish moss that made the room smell like a savanna morning after rain. 300 guests filled the space. City council members, developers, former clients, whose homes and offices I had designed across 4 decades. Journalists from the Savannah Morning News and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. A television crew from WSAV setting up a camera near the stage. And at the center of it all, moving through the crowd like a woman who had been born to occupy rooms this size, was Victoria. She wore an emerald gown that caught the light every time she turned. Her hair was swept up, exposing a diamond necklace I had never seen before, purchased, I suspected, with funds that had been donated in Eleanor's memory. She greeted guests by name, touched their arms, laughed at their jokes, and directed waitstaff with the subtle hand signals of someone who had rehearsed every detail of this evening 100 times. I sat at table 12, near the back, in the navy suit she had chosen for me. Daniel Royce sat to my left, wearing a charcoal blazer and an expression of carefully managed calm. To my right was an empty chair that would remain empty all evening, a detail Victoria had not noticed and I had not explained. "You doing all right?" Daniel asked quietly. "I'm fine. You don't look fine. You look like a man sitting on a detonator." I almost smiled. That's not inaccurate. Across the room, I spotted Franklin near the bar, holding a glass of sparkling water and speaking with a woman I did not recognize. He caught my eye for half a second, no nod, no signal, just a flicker of acknowledgement that said everything was in position. Somewhere in this room, 2 investigators from D.A. Wu's office were seated among the guests, dressed in evening wear, indistinguishable from the donors and politicians surrounding them. The lights dimmed. A hush spread across the ballroom the way silence spreads through a forest before a storm. Not all at once, but in waves. Table by table, conversation by conversation, until the only sound was the soft clink of ice in glasses and the distant hum of the air conditioning. Victoria took the stage. The spotlight found her immediately, and she stood behind the podium as if she had been designed for it, shoulders back, chin raised, the emerald gown glowing under the warm light. Behind her, a massive screen displayed the Bennett and Stone logo, redesigned with modern typography that erased every trace of the original lettering Eleanor had chosen in 1989. "Good evening, everyone," Victoria said, her voice carrying across the room with practiced warmth. "Welcome to the celebration of 30 years of Bennett and Stone, 30 years of vision, craftsmanship, and commitment to the beauty of the American South." Applause. Genuine applause. These people admired her. They saw a young woman who had married into a legacy and carried it forward with grace and energy. They saw the foundation galas, the charity auctions, the social media posts showcasing restored buildings and grateful communities. They did not see the forged signatures, the shell companies, the consulting fees that circled back to her own accounts like water through a closed pipe. Victoria continued. She spoke about Bennett and Stone's founding, mentioning my name once, briefly, the way a tour guide mentions the architect of a building before moving on to discuss the gift shop. She spoke about Eleanor, calling her a woman of extraordinary vision whose spirit lives on through the foundation that bears her name. I watched 3 women at table 6 dab their eyes with napkins. Mrs. Calloway, whose Victorian parlor I had saved, pressed a hand to her chest and whispered something to her husband. They believed every word. The 10-minute video montage began. Images of buildings I had designed filled the screen, the park pavilion bathed in golden hour light, the courthouse renovation gleaming after a spring rain, the community library where Mrs. Patterson had recognized my photograph. A narrator's voice, smooth and professional, described each project without once mentioning who had drawn the original plans. The credits at the end read, "Produced by the Eleanor Foundation for Architectural Preservation, a Bennett and Stone legacy project." Daniel leaned toward me. "That's your pavilion on screen right now." "I know. And she just credited it to a foundation that didn't exist when you designed it." "I know that too." He shook his head slowly. "How are you this calm?" I looked at him. "Because I've been building things for 40 years, Daniel. And the one thing you learn in this profession is that demolition is easy. Anyone can swing a hammer. The hard part is knowing exactly which wall to remove so the whole structure comes down clean." The video ended. Applause filled the room again. Louder this time. Warmed by wine and nostalgia, and the particular generosity people feel when they believe they are part of something noble. Victoria returned to the podium, her smile wider now, feeding on the energy of the room the way a flame feeds on oxygen. "And now," she said, "I'd like to share some exciting news about the future of the Eleanor Foundation." This was the moment. Not the exposure that would come later, in Task 9. In the sequence, Franklin and I had planned down to the minute. But this was the moment when Victoria would commit her final act of public deception, standing before 300 witnesses and a television camera, claiming ownership of a legacy she had stolen. I placed my hands flat on the table. They were steady. Beside me, Daniel's knee bounced under the tablecloth. Across the room, Franklin set down his sparkling water and turned to face the stage. Victoria opened a leather portfolio and began reading. Over the past year, the Eleanor Foundation has raised over $1.2 million for architectural preservation in the Southeast. Tonight, I am proud to announce our next initiative, the Eleanor Bennett Fellowship, a full scholarship for aspiring architects from underserved communities, funded entirely by foundation donors. More applause. Standing ovations from 2 tables near the front. A camera flashed from the WSAV crew. She was building another floor on a structure made of sand, and she was doing it with Eleanor's name written across every beam. I looked at the empty chair beside me. I had reserved it for Eleanor. Not literally, not superstitiously, but as a reminder that the woman whose name was being spoken from that stage had never sought applause, had never needed a spotlight, had never measured her worth by the size of a room or the volume of its clapping. Victoria finished her announcement and raised a champagne flute. "To Eleanor Bennett," she said. "To legacy. To the next 30 years. 300 glasses rose. 300 voices echoed her toast. I did not raise my glass. I did not need to. In 8 minutes, Franklin would walk to the AV booth at the back of the room. In 10 minutes, Victoria's presentation would be replaced by a different one. And in 12 minutes, every person in this room would understand exactly what had been built and what it had been built upon. I looked at the stage one last time. Victoria stood in the spotlight, radiant, untouchable, smiling at a room full of people who adored her. 12 minutes. It started with the screen. Victoria was mid-sentence something about the Foundation's 5-year strategic plan when the image behind her changed. The Bennett and Stone logo dissolved, replaced by a scanned document that filled the 20-foot screen from edge to edge. It was the first transfer agreement. The one that assigned 14 design patents to Marsh Premier Properties for $1. My forged signature glowed under the projector light, magnified to a size that made every imperfection visible. The 2-wide W, the 2-round B, the flat cross of the T. Victoria did not notice immediately. She was looking at the audience, not the screen. And for 3 full seconds, she continued speaking, while 300 pairs of eyes shifted from her face to the document behind her. I watched the realization travel through the room like a current table by table. Row by row, the slow tilt of heads, the narrowing of eyes, the quiet intake of breath that comes before understanding. A woman at table 4 whispered to her husband. A man near the bar set down his drink. The WSAV camera operator adjusted his angle to capture both Victoria and the screen in a single frame. Victoria stopped talking. She turned around. I will remember her face in that moment for as long as I live. It was not fear not yet. It was confusion. The kind that comes when a structure you trusted completely reveals a crack you never imagined. She stared at the document, then looked toward the AV booth at the back of the room, where Franklin stood beside the technician with a laptop open and a USB drive inserted into the system. What she began. The screen changed again. The second transfer document appeared, the one assigning the Bennett and Stone client database to Marsh Premier Properties. Same date. Same forged signature. Same $1 consideration. Below the document, Franklin had added a simple caption in white text on black background. Signature comparison. Walter J. Bennett. Authentic. Left. Versus forged. Right. 2 signatures appeared side by side. The difference was unmistakable, even from the back of the room. My real signature had the upward hook on the W that Eleanor had admired. The compressed B. The decisive T-thros. The forged version looked like a photocopy traced by an unsteady hand. Murmurs spread through the ballroom. Not the polite murmurs of a social event. The low, urgent murmurs of people who are beginning to understand that they have been deceived. Victoria gripped the podium. There has been a technical error. If we could please. The screen changed a third time. Now it displayed the Eleanor Foundation's financial summary, the $1.2 million in donations, the $87,000 allocated to actual preservation, and the $1.1 million paid out to Marsh Premier Properties and Langford Creative Solutions. The numbers were presented in a simple bar graph that required no expertise to interpret. A thin green bar for real preservation work, and a towering red bar for money that had been funneled back to Victoria's companies. Mrs. Calloway stood up at table 6. Her hand was no longer pressed to her chest in admiration. It was pressed to her mouth in horror. She had donated $25,000 to the Eleanor Foundation, money she believed was preserving the Victorian parlor I had saved for her family in 2007. Is this real? She asked, her voice cutting through the murmurs like a knife through silk. Victoria, is this real? Victoria opened her mouth, but no words came out. The spotlight was still on her. The camera was still rolling. 300 people waited. The screen changed again. This time it showed the corporate registration of Marsh Premier Properties from the Florida Division of Corporations. Registered Agent V. Marsh. Principal Address APO Box in Jacksonville. Registration date the 8th of January 2022, 2 months before the forged transfers. Victoria's maiden name appeared on the screen in bold text beneath the registration. Victoria Ann Marsh. The connection completed itself in every mind in the room simultaneously. I could see at the moment of collective understanding, the invisible line drawn between the woman at the podium and the shell company on the screen. It was like watching a building settle onto its foundation, except this foundation was made of fraud, and the building was collapsing inward. Victoria turned to find Nathan. He was standing near the side entrance, frozen, his face carrying an expression I had seen only once before the night Eleanor died. When the doctor had come into the waiting room, and Nathan had understood, before anyone spoke, that his mother was gone. He looked at Victoria now with that same expression. The face of a man watching something he loved become something he did not recognize. Nathan. Victoria started. He shook his head. One small movement, left to right, barely visible from where I sat. But Victoria saw it. And whatever remained of her composure crumbled. She turned back to the audience. Tears were forming in her eyes. Real tears, or performed tears. I could not tell. And perhaps even she did not know the difference anymore. She opened the leather portfolio on the podium as if searching for a script that could save her, but there was no script for this. There was no rehearsal for the moment, when every lie you have told stands behind you on a 20-foot screen. I can explain, she said. The screen changed one final time. A video began playing security footage from the wedding reception at the Marshall house. The footage showed Victoria raising her hand and slapping me across the face. The audio was faint but audible. The sharp crack of palm against cheek, the gasp of nearby guests, and Victoria's voice saying, "Know your place, Walter." The ballroom went silent. Not the polite silence of anticipation, but the absolute silence of 300 people who have run out of ways to process what they are seeing. Victoria looked at the screen. She saw herself emerald earrings, champagne in hand, striking a 63-year-old man whose buildings surrounded them on every wall of this very room. She watched herself smile after the slap. The casual cruelty of it magnified and undeniable. Her knees buckled. She caught herself on the podium, both hands gripping the edges, her body folding forward as if the weight of the room had become a physical force pressing down on her shoulders. 2 people in evening wear rose from tables near the exit and moved toward the stage with the unhurried precision of professionals who have done this before. D.A. Wu's investigators. One of them, a woman with short gray hair and a navy dress, reached the stage first and spoke to Victoria in a voice too low for the microphone to capture. I did not move from table 12. I did not stand, did not speak, did not raise my hand. I had promised Margaret Wu that the evidence would speak for itself, and it had. Daniel placed his hand on my shoulder. "Walter," I looked at him. "It's over," he said. I looked at Eleanor's empty chair, at the magnolia arrangement that had wilted slightly in the heat of the spotlight, at the crystal glass I had never raised during Victoria's toast. "No," I said quietly. "It's not over. It's just the part where the foundation cracks. The harder part is deciding what to build next." The spotlight went dark, the screen went black, and somewhere in the silence, a woman at table 6 was weeping, not for Victoria, not for the foundation, but for Eleanor, whose name had been carried into this room on a lie and would now have to be carried out again, carefully, gently, the way you carry something precious that has been dropped by careless hands. The morning after the gala, Savannah woke up to a different story. The WSAV footage aired at 6 a.m., a 3-minute segment that opened with Victoria's champagne toast and ended with her gripping the podium, knees buckling, as 2 investigators approached the stage. By 8 a.m., the Savannah Morning News had published a front-page article titled "Eleanor Foundation Under Investigation." Millions in donations, allegedly funneled to shell companies. By noon, the story had been picked up by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, then by CNN's Southeast Bureau, then by a national wire service that carried it to screens across the country. I watched none of it. I sat in my room with the door closed, drinking instant coffee, listening to the house come apart around me. The phone rang 47 times before lunch. I counted. Victoria's phone, the one she kept on the kitchen counter, screen side down. The way people do when they do not want to see what is arriving. Each vibration pushed it slightly across the marble. And by the 11th call, it had traveled 3 inches toward the edge. I know this because I walked to the kitchen once to refill my coffee, and I saw the phone trembling like a small animal caught in a trap. Victoria was upstairs. She had not come down since returning from the gala at 11:15 the previous night. Escorted by Nathan, who had driven in silence, a silence I recognized because I had lived inside it for 3 years. It was the silence of a man who has discovered that the person sleeping beside him is not the person he married. Nathan came to my room at 9:30. He stood in the doorway the way he used to stand in my office when he was 12 years old and needed help with a math problem weight on his left foot. Right hand gripping the doorframe. Eyes looking at the floor. "Dad, come in, Nathan." He sat on the edge of the bed. He was still wearing the clothes from the gala, the white dress shirt now wrinkled. The sleeves rolled to his elbows, the tie hanging loose around his neck like a rope that had lost its purpose. "Did you know?" I asked. Not about Victoria's fraud. I already knew the answer to that question. I was asking something harder. "Did you know she was forging my name? Did you know she was using your mother's name to steal?" He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw the answer before he spoke it. I knew something was wrong. I didn't know what. She kept the foundation separate from the firm. She said it was for liability reasons. I signed what she put in front of me because he stopped. His jaw tightened. Because it was easier than asking questions. I did not judge him. I could not. I had spent 3 years carrying grocery bags and taking out trash because it was easier than confronting the woman who controlled my household. Avoidance is a family trait. It seems passed down not through blood but through proximity. The way silence teaches silence. "What happens now?" he asked. "Franklin is handling the legal side. DA Wu's office will move forward with the investigation. Your role depends on what you choose to do next. And Victoria?" I set down my coffee. "That depends on Victoria." He left without saying anything else. I heard him climb the stairs, heard the bedroom door open and close, heard the muffled rise and fall of voices through the ceiling, not shouting, not yet, but the low, strained frequency of a conversation that both parties know will end in damage. By afternoon, the first sponsors began pulling out. The Hendricks family withdrew their $30,000 pledge to the foundation. Judge Whitmore issued a public statement expressing deep concern and requesting a full audit. The Savannah College of Art and Design suspended its partnership pending investigation. One by one, the pillars that had held up Victoria's constructed world were removed, and the structure that remained grew smaller with each hour. I made one phone call that day. Not to Franklin, not to Daniel, not to any of the journalists who had somehow obtained my number and left messages I would never return. I called Pine Ridge Assisted Living in Albany, Georgia. A woman with a kind voice answered. I asked about a resident named Robert Marsh. She confirmed he was there 81 years old, recovering from a stroke he had suffered 7 months earlier. Limited mobility, clear mind. I asked if he received visitors. She said his daughter came once a month, a woman named Victoria. I thanked her and hung up. Then I did something I had been thinking about since Franklin first showed me the bank records. I opened my laptop, navigated to the website of Phoebe Putney Memorial Hospital in Albany, the regional medical center affiliated with Pine Ridge, and made an anonymous donation of $50,000 to their stroke rehabilitation program. I used a cashier's check drawn from a savings account Eleanor, and I had opened in 1997, the year Nathan was born. The memo line read, "In memory of Eleanor Bennett, for those rebuilding what was broken. No one would know it was me." That was the point. Eleanor had taught me that generosity loses its meaning the moment it becomes a performance. The Eleanor Foundation had turned her name into a stage prop. I would not make the same mistake. I closed the laptop and looked out the window. The Savannah afternoon was heavy with humidity, the kind that makes the air visible and turns every surface soft. A moving truck was parked 2 houses down, someone arriving or departing, beginning or ending, the ordinary mechanics of a life in motion. Upstairs, the voices had stopped. The silence that replaced them was not peaceful. It was the silence of a house in which something fundamental has shifted. A load-bearing wall removed, the remaining structure, uncertain of its own capacity to stand. Lily came to my room at 4 o'clock, carrying a juice box and a coloring book. She climbed onto the bed without asking, and opened to a page she had already started a garden with flowers in every color. Some staying inside the lines, some spilling over in the joyful chaos of a child who has not yet learned that boundaries exist. "Grandpa, why is Mommy crying?" I put my arm around her. She smelled like grape juice and crayons, the scent of a childhood still intact, still protected from the wreckage accumulating in the rooms above us. "Sometimes grown-ups cry when they realize they need to fix something," I said. "Like when I broke the vase and cried?" "Exactly like that." She nodded, satisfied with the explanation, and returned to her coloring. I watched her fill in a sunflower with a yellow crayon, pressing hard, the way children do when they want the color to be as bright as possible. Outside, the moving truck pulled away. The street was quiet again, and in the stillness of that late afternoon, with my granddaughter coloring beside me and the house holding its breath above us, I understood something I had not fully grasped until that moment. Revenge was not what I had wanted. Justice was closer, but still incomplete. What I had wanted, what I had built this entire structure to achieve, was the truth. Not my truth or Victoria's truth, but the kind of truth that exists independent of who tells it. The kind that stands on its own foundation. Whether Victoria could face that truth, whether she could look at what the screen had shown her and choose to rebuild rather than deny, was not my decision to make. But I had given her the blueprints. What she built with them was up to her. The call came on a Tuesday, 9 days after the gala. Detective Sandra Holt from the Chatham County Special Victims Unit explained that the DA's office had requested a forensic interview with Lily Bennett, standard procedure, when a minor may have witnessed events related to a tase, criminal activity. "We're not suggesting your granddaughter did anything wrong, Mr. Bennett," she said. "But children sometimes see and hear things that adults assume they missed." Nathan agreed to bring Lily. He did not ask me to come, but as we walked to the car, Lily between us, clutching a stuffed rabbit she had named Professor Carrots, he put his hand on my shoulder, and that small gesture told me more than any conversation could have. The interview took place at the Coastal Children's Advocacy Center on Eisenhower Drive, a low brick building painted in soft blues and greens. Inside, the waiting room had a fish tank, a basket of picture books, and a couch printed with cartoon elephants. Lily went straight to the fish tank. "That one looks like Professor Carrots," she said, pointing at an orange fish. The forensic interviewer was Dr. Angela Price, mid-40s, calm eyes, the particular warmth of someone who had chosen this work because children deserved at least one adult who knew how to listen without leading. Nathan and I watched through a one-way mirror. Detective Holt stood beside us with a legal pad on the windowsill. Dr. Price began simply. "What is your name? How old are you?" Lily answered with the confidence of a child who has not yet learned that some questions carry weight beyond their words. She was 6 3/4. Her favorite subject was art, because Mrs. Dawson let her use the big paintbrushes. Then Dr. Price shifted. "Lily, does Mommy ever ask you to use the camera on her phone?" "Sometimes for her Instagram. And sometimes she asks me to press the red button." "The red button?" "The video button. It makes a movie." Nathan's hand tightened on the windowsill. I watched his knuckles whiten. "Did Mommy ever ask you to press the red button at a party with lots of people in fancy clothes?" Lily tilted her head the way she did when choosing between 2 crayons. "At Daddy's party. The one at the pretty building, with the big stairs." The Marshall house. The night Victoria slapped me. Can you tell me what happened? Lily pulled Professor Carrots onto her lap. Mommy gave me her phone before the party started. She said, "When Grandpa comes to the table, press the red button and don't stop until I say so." She said it was for a surprise. The room behind the mirror went still. Detective Holt uncapped her pen. Nathan closed his eyes. "And did you press the red button?" "Yes." Mommy was talking loud, and Grandpa was holding a plate. Then Mommy hit Grandpa's face, and I got scared and almost dropped the phone. "What did you do then?" "I kept pressing because Mommy said don't stop. But I was crying a little bit because Grandpa looked sad." Victoria had not slapped me in spontaneous anger. She had planned it. She had positioned her 6-year-old daughter as a camera operator, used the word surprise to mask the cruelty, and weaponized her own child's innocence. Lily continued without prompting. After the party, Mommy watched the movie and she was smiling. She said I did a good job. Then she said, "Don't tell Daddy or Grandpa, okay? It's our secret." I said okay because Mommy said secrets are like presents you keep inside. Nathan turned from the glass. He walked to the far corner, pressed both palms against the wall, and stood with his head bowed, breathing in the slow, deliberate way of a man trying not to break. I wanted to go to him to put my hand on his back, the way I had when he was a boy, and the world delivered its first small cruelties. A lost baseball game, a goldfish that died on a Sunday morning, but he was not a boy anymore. He was a father discovering that the person he had trusted most had turned his daughter into an instrument of harm. Detective Holt stepped out to make a phone call. Through the glass, Dr. Price asked Lily if she wanted to draw. Lily said yes. She drew a purple house, the same one she had taped to my wall weeks ago. But this time she added something new, a small figure in the doorway, arms open, with Grandpa written above it in crooked capitals. I pressed my fingertips against the glass. Nathan returned to the window. His eyes were red but dry. He watched his daughter draw and said, "Without looking at me, I'm filing for divorce, and I'm requesting full custody." I understood the weight of those words. He was not just ending a marriage. He was dismantling a structure he had helped build to protect a girl who still believed secrets were presents you keep inside. "I'll support whatever you decide," I said. He nodded once. When Dr. Price signaled the session was complete, Nathan entered the room. Lily looked up and smiled. The unguarded smile of a child who does not know the adults around her are rearranging the architecture of her world. "Daddy, I drew Grandpa's house." Nathan knelt beside her. He looked at the purple house, at the figure in the doorway, at the crooked letters. Then he pulled his daughter into his arms, not briefly, not politely, but with the desperate tenderness of a man who has finally understood what matters. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Let's hang it on the fridge." I stood in the hallway and watched them walk out together, Lily on Nathan's hip, Professor Carrots dangling from her hand, the purple house pressed against Nathan's chest, like a blueprint for something not yet built, but someday might be. The Chatham County Courthouse sat on Montgomery Street, like a monument to the idea that truth, given enough time and a proper room, will eventually find its way to the surface. I had driven past it 1,000 times in 40 years. I had never walked through its doors as a witness. Franklin met me on the steps at 8:15. 15 minutes before the hearing was scheduled to begin. He wore a dark gray suit and carried a leather briefcase that looked like it had survived more courtrooms than most judges. His face was calm, but his eyes had the focused intensity of a man who had spent 6 weeks preparing for a single morning. "How are you feeling?" he asked, like an architect walking into someone else's building. He almost smiled. "Today, you're the foundation. Just tell the truth and let the structure hold." The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lights that hummed at a frequency just below conscious awareness, and rows of bench seating that reminded me of a church which, in a way, it was. A place where people came to confess, to be judged, and occasionally, to be forgiven. Victoria sat at the defense table with her attorney, a tall man named Gerard Cross who charged $600 an hour and whose reputation rested on his ability to make guilty people appear misunderstood. Victoria wore a navy dress, conservative, deliberate, the wardrobe equivalent of a closing argument. Her hair was pulled back. No diamond necklace. No emerald gown. She looked like a different woman. And I suspected that was the point. She did not look at me when I entered. She did not look at Nathan, who sat 3 rows behind me, with Franklin's paralegal. She looked straight ahead, at a point on the wall just above the judge's bench, as if she could will herself into a version of this room where none of this was happening. Judge Patricia Owens entered at 8:32. She was in her late 50s, silver-haired, with the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades listening to people lie and had developed an almost architectural sense for where the load-bearing truths were hidden. The prosecution presented its case with the precision Franklin and D.A. Wu had engineered. Bank records, corporate filings, the forged transfer documents, authenticated by a handwriting expert who explained to the courtroom in terms anyone could understand that the signatures on the Bennett and Stone transfers were inconsistent with the known exemplars of Walter J. Bennett's handwriting in 17 measurable characteristics. The Eleanor Foundation's financial records were projected on a screen, smaller than the Gala's, but no less devastating. The thin green bar, the towering red bar, the $1.1 million that had circled from donors through the foundation and back to Victoria's companies like water through a closed pipe. Then came the video from the Children's Advocacy Center. Dr. Price's interview with Lily, played with Lily's face obscured per juvenile privacy protocols, but her voice perfectly clear. The courtroom heard a 6-year-old girl describe how her mother had handed her a phone, told her to press the red button when Grandpa arrived, and called it a surprise. "Secrets are like presents you keep inside," Lily's voice said through the courtroom speakers. A woman in the gallery pressed her hand to her mouth. Gerard Cross shifted in his chair. Victoria's jaw tightened, but she did not move. I was called to testify at 10:15. I sat in the witness chair and looked out at a room full of strangers who knew my name only because a woman had slapped me at a party and stolen my life's work for $1. Franklin guided me through the testimony, the discovery of the access card, the filing cabinet, the forged signatures, the foundation, the bank records, the gala. I answered each question the way Eleanor had taught me to build. Honestly. Precisely. Without ornamentation. Gerard Cross cross-examined me for 20 minutes. He asked whether I had entered the Bennett and Stone office without authorization. I explained that my name was still on the corporate charter, and my access card had never been deactivated. He asked whether I had a personal vendetta against Victoria. I said I had a professional obligation to protect the legacy my wife and I had built together. He asked whether I had orchestrated the gala exposure for public humiliation. I orchestrated it for public truth, I said. There is a difference. Judge Owens called a recess at 11. When the court reconvened, Gerard Cross requested a sidebar. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. When it ended, Cross returned to the defense table and whispered to Victoria. Her face did not change, but her hands, folded on the table in front of her, began to tremble. Victoria entered a guilty plea to 3 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of forgery, and 1 count of non-profit misappropriation. Judge Owens accepted the plea and scheduled sentencing for the following month. But the hearing was not over. Franklin stood and addressed the court. Your Honor, I would like to enter into evidence a document relevant to the disposition of Bennett and Stone corporate assets. He presented a single page, a clause buried in the original Bennett and Stone partnership agreement, drafted in 1989, written in Eleanor's careful handwriting, and notarized on the day the firm was incorporated. The clause stated that in the event of fraud, forgery, or material misrepresentation by any party using the Bennett and Stone name, all intellectual property rights, client relationships, and corporate assets would revert automatically and irrevocably to the founding partner. Walter J. Bennett. Eleanor had written it, 35 years ago, before Victoria existed in our lives, before Nathan had learned to walk, Eleanor had sat at a second-hand drafting table in a Savannah garage and written a single paragraph that protected everything we would ever build. Judge Owens read the clause. She looked at Franklin. She looked at me. Mr. Bennett, were you aware of this clause? Yes, Your Honor. My wife insisted on it. She said that honest buildings need honest foundations, and honest foundations need a failsafe. The clause was entered into evidence. Marsh Premier Properties' claims to Bennett and Stone's intellectual property were voided. The forged transfers were nullified. Everything, every design, every patent, every client relationship returned to me. Victoria finally looked at me. Across the courtroom, across the distance between the defense table and the witness gallery, she met my eyes for the first time since the gala. I expected to see anger or hatred or defiance. What I saw instead was something I had not anticipated: exhaustion. The complete, bone-deep exhaustion of a woman who had been carrying a structure built on lies and had finally been allowed to set it down. I did not look away. I did not smile. I held her gaze the way you hold a wall that is about to fall, steadily, carefully, aware that what happens next depends entirely on which direction it leans. Nathan filed for divorce that afternoon. The petition cited irreconcilable differences and requested full custody of Lily Marie Bennett. Victoria did not contest it. I drove home alone. The courthouse grew smaller in my rearview mirror, its stone columns catching the afternoon light. Eleanor's clause, her failsafe, her final act of protection, sat in a manila folder on the passenger seat beside me. I placed my hand on the folder the way I used to place my hand on Eleanor's shoulder when she was bent over her desk, working late, building something she believed would last. You always were the better architect, I said. The car was quiet. The road was straight. And for the first time in 3 years, the drive home felt like driving towards something, rather than away from it. The letter arrived 3 weeks after the trial. Plain white envelope, no return address, postmarked from Albany, Georgia. My name was written in shaky handwriting, the kind that belongs to someone whose hands no longer obey the instructions their mind sends. I opened it at the kitchen table while Lily ate cereal across from me, telling Professor Carrots about a dream involving a purple spaceship. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper torn from a composition notebook. Dear Mr. Bennett, my name is Robert Marsh. I believe you knew me once, when I was a different man, and you were building something I helped carry for a little while. I am writing because my daughter has done something terrible, and I believe I am the reason why. I am not asking for forgiveness. I am asking for 5 minutes of your time. Pine Ridge Assisted Living, Room 14. Robert Marsh. Robert Marsh. The name had echoed in my mind since the night I found the corporate filings for Marsh Premier Properties. I had filed it away, told myself I would examine it later. But dust does not settle on its own. It waits for someone to open a window. I reached back through 30 years of memory, sorting through faces the way you sort through old blueprints by project, by year, by feeling. Bobby Marsh. That was what we had called him. He worked for Bennett and Stone from 1991 to 1994. A site foreman hired on a handshake after Eleanor saw him helping a neighbor repair a porch on Abercorn Street. Good with his hands. Reliable with materials. Honest with clients. Eleanor said he had the kind of integrity that shows in the way a man holds a level straight, patient, unwilling to cheat the bubble. But Bobby had a problem with time. He arrived late, not dramatically, but persistently. 15 minutes, 20 minutes, always with a reasonable excuse that lost its reason by the third telling. I warned him twice. The third time, spring of 1994, I let him go. I remembered the conversation. Friday afternoon. Bobby stood in my office doorway, listened without arguing, shook my hand, and left. I never saw him again. He was a footnote, a man who was good but not punctual, skilled but ultimately replaceable, except he was not replaceable to his family. Victoria Ann Marsh. Bobby Marsh's daughter. The connections assembled themselves with the clarity of a blueprint, revealing a flaw you thought was impossible. Victoria had not married Nathan by accident. She had not infiltrated Bennett and Stone out of simple greed. She had come for something older and deeper than money, the man who had taken her father's livelihood with a handshake and never looked back. I drove to Albany the next morning. 3 hours south, through flat Georgia farmland, where the sky stretched wider than any ceiling I had ever designed. Pine Ridge sat at the end of a quiet road, lined with pecan trees. A single-story facility, with rocking chairs on the porch that moved in the breeze, as if occupied by ghosts who had not decided to leave. Room 14. Robert Marsh sat in a wheelchair beside a window, overlooking a garden of marigolds planted in neat rows. 81 years old but looked older. Thin, hollow-cheeked. His left arm motionless from the stroke, but his eyes were clear, sharp. The eyes of a man who had spent 7 months thinking about what he wanted to say. "Mr. Bennett, you came." He came. He gestured to the chair beside the window. I sat. The marigolds caught the morning light, their orange heads bobbing in a breeze I could not feel through the glass. "She was 9 when I lost the job," Robert said. "Victoria. She didn't understand why we had to move, why I couldn't find work, why her mother cried at the kitchen table when she thought we were asleep." He paused. "I never blamed you. You had rules. I broke them. But a child doesn't understand rules. A child understands that her father came home one day and stopped smiling. I listened. I owed him that." She watched me fall apart. Odd jobs. Crews that hired me for a week and dropped me for someone cheaper. Her mother left when Victoria was 14. After that, it was just us, a man who couldn't keep a job, and a girl who decided she would never let anyone take anything from her again. He looked at the marigolds. She built herself into someone hard, someone who could walk into any room and take control before anyone took it from her. She married your son because she wanted inside the walls of the house that locked her father out. I sat with his words the way you sit with a structural report that reveals the crack runs deeper than expected, all the way to the foundation, to a decision made 30 years ago that seemed small and turned out to be the first domino in a chain that did not stop falling until it reached a courtroom in Savannah. "I didn't know," I said. 3 words that could not bridge 30 years. "I know you didn't," Robert said. "That's why I wrote. Not for guilt. For understanding. Understanding is the only thing with any chance of fixing what's broken." I looked at his motionless arm. At the garden. At the room that smelled like antiseptic and loneliness. And the quiet persistence of a man who had waited 3 decades to deliver a single message. "Robert," I said. "I'm sorry." He nodded, not quickly, not dismissively, but with the slow gravity of a man who had needed those words for a very long time and was allowing himself to receive them. "What will you do with my daughter?" I thought about Victoria's face in the courtroom, the exhaustion, the trembling hands, about Lily's purple house, about Eleanor's claws, about marigolds nodding outside the window of a room where a man I had wronged waited for an answer. "I'm going to give her what I should have given you," I said. "A second chance." I asked Franklin to arrange the meeting. Neutral ground. Not the house. Not the courthouse. Not any building connected to Bennett and Stone. He suggested his office, but I chose somewhere else. The community room at the Savannah Public Library on Bull Street. A building I had helped renovate in 2006, where Eleanor had once read stories to children on Saturday mornings. Victoria arrived at 10 a.m. She came alone, as I had requested. No lawyer. No Nathan. No audience. Just 2 people who had spent 3 years circling each other like architects working on competing blueprints for the same piece of land. She looked different. Not the emerald gown Victoria of the gala, not the navy dress Victoria of the courtroom, but something closer to the woman who might have existed before the armor went on. She wore jeans and a gray sweater. No jewelry. Her hair was down. She carried nothing except a paper coffee cup she held with both hands, the way people hold things when they need something to grip. I was already seated at the long table near the window. Sunlight fell across the wooden surface in rectangles that shifted as clouds passed overhead. I had arrived 20 minutes early, not because I was anxious, but because architects arrive early. We like to understand the space before anyone else enters it. She sat across from me. The table was 6 feet wide. It felt like 6 miles. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The library hummed around us, the quiet footsteps of patrons, the whisper of pages turning, the occasional beep of the checkout scanner. Normal sounds. The sounds of a world that continued functioning while two people sat inside it, trying to find a language for things that had no easy words. Victoria spoke first. "My father told me you visited him." "I did. He said you apologized." "I did that too." She looked at her coffee. Steam rose from the lid in a thin curl that vanished before it reached the ceiling. "I don't understand why." "Because I owed him one. 30 years ago, I fired a man without thinking about what happened after he walked out the door. I treated him like a problem to be solved instead of a person to be understood. That doesn't excuse what I did." "No, it doesn't. But it explains part of it. And explanations matter, because without them, we keep building the same broken structures over and over." She looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. Whatever crying she had done it before arriving privately. The way her father had described her mother crying at the kitchen table when she thought no one was listening. "I was 9, she said quietly. "When he lost the job, I remember the drive home. He didn't say anything. He just gripped the steering wheel and stared at the road. That night I heard him in the garage, moving boxes, and I thought we were going on a trip. I was excited." She paused. "We were moving. He couldn't make rent." I listened the way I had listened to Robert, not to respond, not to fix, but to receive. After Mom left, it was just us. He worked construction when he could find it. Some months we ate rice and canned beans for 3 weeks straight. He never complained. He just got quieter. And I decided that the world was divided into 2 kinds of people, the ones who build the walls and the ones who get locked outside them. I was going to be inside. And Bennett and Stone was the wall. Bennett and Stone was the wall. Your family was the wall. Everything I did, marrying Nathan, joining the firm, creating the foundation, it was all about getting inside and making sure no one could ever push me out again. She set down the coffee cup. I told myself I was doing it for my father. But I wasn't. I was doing it for the 9-year-old girl in the back seat who didn't understand why her life was falling apart. The sunlight shifted on the table. A rectangle moved across her hands and settled on the wood between us like a bridge made of light. "What I did to you was wrong," she said. "The forgeries, the foundation, the slap. Using Lily." Her voice cracked on her daughter's name. "Using my own daughter. There is no justification for that." "None. I know. So why are you here?" "You won. You have the company back. The designs. The clause. Nathan has Lily. I have a sentencing hearing in 3 weeks and a criminal record that will follow me for the rest of my life. Why would you sit across from me in a library and offer me anything?" I reached into my jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I placed it on the table between us and slid it across. She unfolded it. It was a single-page proposal typed by Franklin, reviewed by me, approved by Judge Owens as part of Victoria's pre-sentencing conditions. The heading read, "The Second Chance Foundation Participant Agreement." The proposal outlined a 12-month program. Victoria would work full-time with Habitat for Humanity's Savannah chapter, building homes for families who had lost theirs. Families like the one Robert Marsh had struggled to hold together after losing his job. She would receive no salary, no title, no public recognition. She would work with her hands, on scaffolding and in mud, framing walls and hanging drywall alongside volunteers who did not know her name or her story. At the end of 12 months, if she completed the program, Walter Bennett would write a letter to Judge Owens recommending a reduced sentence. If she did not complete it, the original sentencing guidelines would apply. Victoria read it twice. She set the paper down and pressed her fingertips against the table the way I had pressed mine against the glass at the Children's Advocacy Center when Lily drew the purple house. "You want me to build houses," she said. "I want you to build something real. With your hands. Not on someone else's name. Why would you do this for me?" I thought about Eleanor's promise. About Robert's marigolds. About Lily's purple house with the figure in the doorway and the crooked letters spelling Grandpa, because 30 years ago I broke something I didn't know I was breaking. I can't go back and fix that, but I can make sure the next thing I build is better than the last. Victoria stared at the proposal. The library was quiet around us. Somewhere a child laughed. A bright, clean sound that cut through the silence the way sunlight cuts through a window you have forgotten to open. She picked up the pen I had placed beside the paper. She held it for a long moment, turning it between her fingers the way I imagined her father once turned a level carefully. Deliberately. Checking the bubble before committing. She signed. Not the wide, confident signature she used on foundation letterhead. Not the calculated handwriting of a woman performing authority. A smaller signature. Quieter. The signature of someone beginning again. I folded the paper and placed it back in my jacket. We sat for another minute in the sunlight, saying nothing. Two people on opposite sides of a table that no longer felt like 6 miles. Then Victoria stood, picked up her coffee, and walked toward the door. She paused at the threshold the way her father had paused in my office doorway 30 years ago. "Mr. Bennett." "Yes? Thank you for visiting my father." She left. I sat in the library and listened to the building breathe. The first house was on Waters Avenue, 3 blocks south of the Greyhound station. In a neighborhood where porches sagged and chain-link fences leaned at angles that would have made any architect wince. The lot had been empty for 6 years, a rectangle of weeds and broken concrete that the city had forgotten, and the neighbors had stopped hoping anyone would remember. Habitat for Humanity broke ground on a Tuesday morning in March. I stood on the sidewalk and watched a crew of 14 volunteers unload lumber from a flatbed truck, while a site supervisor named Carl distributed hard hats and safety vests with the methodical calm of a man who had built 40 houses and knew that the first hour always looked like chaos. Victoria arrived at 7:15. She parked a rented Honda at the curb, stepped out, and stood for a moment looking at the empty lot. The way I imagined she had once looked at Bennett and Stone on the day she first walked through its doors, measuring it, calculating its dimensions, deciding what she could make of it. But this time there was no emerald gown, no diamond necklace, no podium. She wore work boots, jeans, and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to her elbows. Her hair was pulled back under a baseball cap. She carried nothing except a pair of leather work gloves that looked new and stiff. The gloves of someone who had never held a hammer for 8 hours straight. Carl handed her a hard hat. "You ever framed a wall before?" "No." "You'll learn." Everyone does. She did learn. Not quickly, not gracefully, but with the stubborn determination of a woman who had spent her entire life refusing to fail at anything she attempted. By noon on the first day she had blistered both palms, bruised her left thumb with a misplaced hammer strike, and driven 47 nails into a section of wall framing that Carl inspected and declared not bad for a first-timer. I was not supposed to be there. The agreement stated that Victoria's participation would carry no public recognition, and my presence risked drawing attention. But I came anyway, not to supervise, not to judge, but because I was an architect, and architects cannot resist watching a structure rise from nothing. I sat in the Buick across the street, drinking coffee from a thermos Eleanor had given me in 2008, and I watched. The first week was the hardest. Victoria worked alongside strangers who did not know her story. A retired schoolteacher named Gloria, a college student named Marcus, a plumber named Hank, who told the same 3 jokes on rotation and laughed at them himself every time. They talked while they worked, the easy conversation of people united by a shared task. And Victoria listened more than she spoke. On the 3rd day, Gloria asked Victoria what she did for a living. Victoria paused, a nail held between her lips, and said, "I'm starting over." Gloria nodded, as if that were the most natural answer in the world, and handed her another board. By the end of the 2nd week, the frame was up. 4 walls, a roof line, window openings that let the March sunlight pour through like water filling a vessel. Victoria stood inside the unfinished structure and turned in a slow circle, looking at the bones of a house she had helped raise from a vacant lot. I recognized the expression on her face. I had worn it myself. 40 years ago, standing inside the first structure, Bennett and Stone ever built a kitchen remodel on Habersham Street that cost $72 in materials and took 3 weekends to complete. It was the expression of someone who has discovered that building something real with your own hands produces a satisfaction that no amount of stolen money or forged signatures can replicate. The foundation launch happened quietly, without cameras or champagne. Franklin filed the incorporation papers. I signed as founding director. The mission statement was 3 sentences long, written on a legal pad at my kitchen table at 2 in the morning. The Second Chance Foundation exists to provide meaningful work and mentorship to individuals rebuilding their lives after legal, financial, or personal crisis. We believe that the act of building physically, tangibly, with hands and tools and honest materials, is itself a form of rehabilitation. We build homes. In the process, we rebuild people. Daniel Royce designed the logo, a simple line drawing of 2 hands holding a brick, 1 hand steady, 1 hand learning. He refused payment. "Consider it rent," he said. "For every building of yours I studied in architecture school." Victoria was listed as participant 1. There was no participant 2 yet. But Franklin said the applications would come. They always did, he said. Once people learned that someone was offering not charity but opportunity, the chance to build something rather than receive something. The house on Waters Avenue was completed in 11 weeks. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. A kitchen with a window above the sink that faced east, so the morning light would fall across the counter while someone made breakfast. The family who would live there, a mother named Denise and her 2 sons, aged 8 and 11, came to see it on the day the last piece of trim was nailed into place. Denise walked through the front door and stopped in the living room. She put her hand on the wall Victoria had helped frame on her first day, and stood there for a long time without speaking. Her older son ran to the backyard. Her younger son asked if he could have the room with the window that faced the big tree. Victoria stood near the doorway, hard hat in hand, watching. Her work gloves were no longer new. The leather was dark with sweat and sawdust, creased at the knuckles, shaped to her hands in the way that tools shape themselves to the people who use them honestly. Denise turned to the group of volunteers. "Who built this?" she asked. Carl gestured to the crew. "Everyone." Together, Denise's eyes found Victoria. She did not know who Victoria was. She did not know about the gala, the forgeries, the courtroom. She saw only a woman in a flannel shirt with calloused hands and sawdust in her hair. "Thank you," Denise said. Victoria nodded. She did not speak, but I saw something shift behind her eyes. A small, quiet rearrangement, like a wall settling onto a foundation it had finally found. That evening, Victoria called me. It was the first time she had initiated contact since the library meeting. Her voice was hoarse from a day of work, and what I suspected was an hour of crying. "Mr. Bennett." "Victoria." The younger boy asked if he could have the room with the window. "The one I framed." I heard a pause. Then, "Is this what it felt like? When you built things?" I thought about the kitchen on Habersham Street, about the Forsyth Park Pavilion, about every structure I had ever raised from nothing and watched become someone's home, someone's workplace, someone's shelter from the particular cruelties of a world that does not always protect the people who need protecting most. "Yes," I said. "That's what it felt like." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said something I did not expect. I'm going to visit my father this weekend. I'm going to tell him about the house. He'd like that. Good night, Mr. Bennett. Good night, Victoria. I hung up and sat in my room. Lily's purple house was still taped to the wall. Beside it, Nathan had pinned a photograph taken that afternoon, the Waters Avenue house. Finished. Sunlight on its new roof. 14 volunteers standing on the porch with their hard hats raised. Victoria was on the far left, almost out of frame. She was not smiling. But she was standing. And sometimes, standing is enough. By the 6th month, Victoria had helped build 4 houses. The second was on 39th Street. A 2-bedroom for an elderly couple named the Washingtons, who had lost their home to a kitchen fire and spent 11 months living in their daughter's basement. The third was on Gwinnett Street, a narrow shotgun-style house for a single father named Jerome, who worked 2 shifts at the port and slept on a mattress on his sister's floor. The fourth was on East Broad, a 3-bedroom for a family of 5 who had been displaced by a landlord's renovation and had nowhere left to go. Each house taught Victoria something different. The Washingtons' house taught her patience. Mr. Washington visited the site every day with a thermos of sweet tea and stories about the neighborhood in 1962. And Victoria learned to listen without checking her phone. Jerome's house taught her precision. The shotgun layout left no room for error. Every measurement mattered. Every cut had to be clean. The East Broad house taught her humility. The youngest child, a 4-year-old girl named Ava, brought Victoria a dandelion on the last day of construction and said, "This is for the lady who built my room." Victoria kept the dandelion. She pressed it between the pages of a notebook she had started carrying, a small leather journal where she recorded measurements, material lists, and occasionally, late at night, things that were not about construction at all. I know this because Nathan told me. Nathan and Victoria's divorce had been finalized in May. It was quiet, uncontested, handled by lawyers who exchanged documents without drama. Nathan kept the house. Victoria moved into a 1-bedroom apartment on Habersham Street, 3 blocks from the building where Bennett and Stone had completed its first project in 1989. I do not know if she chose that address deliberately. I suspect she did. Lily spent weekdays with Nathan and alternating weekends with Victoria. The custody arrangement was careful, structured, designed by attorneys to minimize disruption. But children are not structures. They do not follow blueprints. They follow love. Wherever it leads. In whatever imperfect form it takes. On a Saturday in August, Victoria brought Lily to the East Broad construction site. It was not a scheduled visit. The house was nearly complete, and Victoria had come to install the last set of cabinet handles in the kitchen. Lily wore a yellow sundress and rain boots, because she was 6 and rain boots were appropriate for all occasions. Carl gave Lily a junior hard hat, bright pink, 3 sizes too large, and let her carry a bag of screws across the yard. She treated the assignment with the gravity of a surgeon transporting organs. Walking slowly, both hands gripping the bag, eyes fixed on the ground, as if a single misstep would end civilization. Victoria watched her daughter from the kitchen window. I watched Victoria from the Buick. When Lily delivered the screws, Carl said, "Good job, Foreman." Lily turned to her mother with an expression of pure, unfiltered pride, the kind that cannot be manufactured, rehearsed, or performed for an Instagram audience. "Mommy, he called me Foreman." Victoria knelt on the kitchen floor, sawdust on her jeans, a screwdriver in her back pocket, and pulled her daughter into an embrace that lasted longer than any hug I had ever seen her give. When she let go, her eyes were wet. "You earned it, baby," she said. That evening I received a text message from Victoria. It contained no words, only a photograph. Lily standing on the porch of the East Broad house, pink hard hat tilted sideways, holding a screwdriver like a sword, grinning at the camera with the fearless joy of a child who does not yet know the weight of the world but has already begun learning how to carry it. Below the photograph, a second message arrived. She asked if she could come every Saturday. I typed back, "Tell Carl she's hired." September brought the sentencing hearing. Victoria stood before Judge Owens in the same courtroom where she had entered her guilty plea 5 months earlier. She wore the gray sweater from the library meeting. Her hands were calloused now, visibly, undeniably, the hands of someone who had spent 6 months gripping hammers and carrying lumber. Franklin presented the completion report from Habitat for Humanity. 4 houses built. Over 2,000 volunteer hours logged. Letters of support from Carl, from Gloria, from Denise, from Jerome, from the Washingtons. A letter from Victoria's counselor, documenting her participation in weekly therapy sessions. And a letter from me. I had written it at the kitchen table at midnight. The same table where I had written the Foundation's mission statement. It was short. 3 paragraphs. It said that Victoria Marsh had caused significant harm to my family, my business, and my wife's memory. It said that accountability requires more than punishment. It requires transformation, and it said that in 6 months of building houses with her hands, Victoria had demonstrated a willingness to become someone different from the person who had stood at a podium in an emerald gown and lied to 300 people. Judge Owens read the letter aloud. Victoria stood with her head bowed, listening to my words spoken in someone else's voice in a room full of strangers. When the judge finished, she looked at Victoria. "Miss Marsh, the court has reviewed the evidence of your rehabilitation efforts. Given the completion of the program, the support letters, and Mr. Bennett's recommendation, I am reducing your sentence to 3 years of probation with continued community service. You will remain a participant in the Second Chance Foundation for the duration of your probation." Victoria nodded. She did not cry. She did not collapse. She stood the way a wall stands after surviving a storm, still upright, still bearing weight, aware of the cracks, but no longer afraid of them. Outside the courthouse, she found me on the steps. The October sun was low, casting the kind of golden light that makes Savannah look like a painting someone left, unfinished, beautiful but impermanent, always becoming something new. "Mr. Bennett." "Victoria." She held out her hand. Her palm was rough. The skin hardened in places where blisters had formed and healed, and formed again. I took it. We shook hands, not the way lawyers shake hands after a deal, but the way builders shake hands after a day of work. Firmly. Honestly. With the understanding that what has been built between you is stronger than what was broken. "I have a question," she said. "Go ahead." "The 5th house. The one starting next month on Price Street. Carl said it needs an architect to review the foundation plans." She paused. "Would you be willing?" I looked at her. At the calloused hands, and the gray sweater, and the face that no longer carried the armor it once wore. At the woman who had slapped me at a wedding, stolen my life's work, used her daughter as a weapon, and then spent 6 months on her knees in sawdust learning what it meant to build something that mattered. "I'll bring my drafting pencils," I said. She almost smiled. Not the polished, calculated smile of the gala. Something smaller. Something real. "Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Call me Walter." The 5th house was finished on a Saturday in December. Price Street. 2 blocks from Forsyth Park. Close enough that you could hear the fountain from the front porch, if the wind blew right. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen with butcher block countertops that Victoria had sanded by hand over 3 weekends until the grain was smooth enough to run your palm across without catching. I had reviewed the foundation plans myself. My first drafting work in 4 years, sitting at Eleanor's old desk with a pencil she had sharpened the week before she died. The family who would live there was named Okafor, a Nigerian couple with twin daughters, aged 10, who had emigrated to Savannah 3 years earlier and spent 20 months in transitional housing, while the father, Emmanuel, completed his nursing certification. The mother, Grace, taught Sunday school at a Baptist church on Anderson Street and had applied for a Habitat house 4 times before being accepted. They arrived at noon. Emmanuel wore a dress shirt buttoned to the collar. Grace carried a Bible and a casserole dish covered in foil. The twins ran straight to the backyard and began arguing over who would get the room with the window facing the park. Victoria stood on the porch holding a set of keys, not house keys, which Carl would present officially, but the keys to the supply shed, passed from one project to the next. a small tradition among the volunteers. She would hand them to the next participant when the sixth house began in January. I stood beside her. Nathan was in the yard with Lily, who wore the pink hard hat Carl had given her in August, and which she now refused to remove for any occasion, including church, school picture day, and a visit to the dentist that had required gentle negotiation from 3 adults. Daniel Royce had come from New York for the weekend. He stood near the fence talking with Franklin, who held a cup of coffee and nodded at whatever Daniel was saying, with the tolerant patience of a man who had been listening to architects explain things for 30 years. Mrs. Patterson was there. Gloria was there. Carl was there. Even Robert Marsh was there, driven up from Albany by a Pine Ridge volunteer, seated in his wheelchair on the sidewalk, a blanket across his lap, watching his daughter stand on the porch of a house she had helped build with hands that were no longer smooth. It was the closest thing to a family gathering I had experienced since Eleanor's funeral. Except this one was not about loss. It was about what comes after loss, the slow, imperfect, stubborn act of building something new from the wreckage of something old. Carl gave his speech. Emmanuel received the keys. Grace cried. The twins fought over the backyard tree. Lily declared herself foreman of the celebration and distributed juice boxes to every adult with the authority of a 6-year-old who has discovered that a pink hard hat grants unlimited power. After the ceremony, I walked to the edge of the property and looked at the house. It was not the most beautiful structure I had ever seen. The trim was slightly uneven on the east side. One of the porch steps sat a 1/4 inch higher than the others. The paint on the garage door had a drip mark near the bottom that no one had caught before it dried. It was imperfect. And it was the most honest thing I had been part of building in 40 years. Victoria came and stood beside me. We looked at the house together in silence, the way 2 architects look at a completed project, cataloging its flaws and loving it anyway. 5 houses, she said. 5 houses. My father cried when he saw this one. He tried to hide it, but I saw. I saw too. She turned to me. The December light was soft on her face. The kind of winter sun that does not warm but illuminates, showing everything clearly without burning anything away. I need to say something I should have said a long time ago. You don't have to. I do. She took a breath. I'm sorry. Not the legal sorry. Not the courtroom sorry. I'm sorry for the slap. For Eleanor's name. For Lily. For every day I made you carry grocery bags and take out trash and sit in a back room while I paraded through the house you built. I'm sorry for all of it. I looked at her, at the calloused hands and the sawdust under her fingernails and the woman who had emerged from beneath the armor like a building, revealed after scaffolding, comes down smaller than expected, more vulnerable than imagined, but standing on a foundation that would hold. I know you are, I said. We stood there for another minute. Lily ran across the yard with a juice box in each hand, hard hat bouncing, shouting something about Professor Carrots needing a room in the new house. Nathan followed, laughing a sound I had not heard from my son in years, genuine and unguarded. The laugh of a man who had stopped holding his breath. Robert Marsh raised his working hand from his wheelchair and waved at his daughter. Victoria waved back. Across 30 years of silence, across a Friday afternoon dismissal and a vacant lot and a courtroom and 5 houses built with honest hands, a father and daughter looked at each other and found something that had been lost so long. Neither of them remembered what it felt like. Grace. That evening I sat alone in my room. Lily's purple house was still on the wall, faded now, the crayon lines softened by months of sunlight. Beside it hung the photograph of the Waters Avenue volunteers. Beside that, a new edition Lily's drawing of the Price Street house, complete with twin stick figures in the backyard, a pink hard hat on every person, and the words, Grandpa's House, written across the top, in letters that were getting steadily less crooked. I picked up Eleanor's photograph from the nightstand. 32 years old, holding keys, laughing at something I could not remember. We built something, I told her. Not a building, not a firm. Something better. Something that will outlast both of us. I set the photograph down and looked out the window. Savannah was quiet. The streetlights cast amber circles on the sidewalk, the same color as the spotlights at the gala, but softer now, gentler. The light of a city that had watched one family break apart and slowly, imperfectly, begin to reassemble itself. I am 64 years old. I have designed buildings that will stand for 100 years. But the most important thing I ever built was not made of brick or steel or glass. It was made of forgiveness. Messy, difficult, unfinished forgiveness, laid one piece at a time, by hands that learned too late, that the foundations we break in others become the cracks in ourselves. Build with your hands, not on someone else's name. That is the only architecture that lasts. If this story made you think about second chances, about the people you've hurt and the people who've hurt you, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment and tell me, do you believe people can truly change? Or do the cracks always remain? Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next story. And remember, the strongest foundations are the ones we choose to rebuild.